Blood looked surprisingly dull on white silk. That was the first thing I realized when the gunfire started. 10 minutes earlier, I was standing in a supply closet, listening to my fiancé grunt against my maid of honor. Now, I was standing at the altar, with a man whose name was whispered in alleys and boardrooms with equal terror. I didn't marry for love. I married for revenge, a cancelled debt, and because I had absolutely nothing left to lose. Sweat prickled at the nape of my neck, trapped beneath layers of stiff tulle and suffocating lace. The bridal suite in the basement of St. Jude's smelled of aerosol hairspray, stale lilies, and the sour tang of anxiety. My dress, a $10,000 monstrosity my future mother-in-law had bullied me into buying, weighed at least 20 pounds. The boning in the corset dug into my ribs with every shallow breath. I hated it. I hated the scratch of the sequins, the tight pinch of my satin heels, and the persistent throb behind my left eye. "Just 10 more minutes, Sadie," my mother had chirped, before fluttering out to manage the caterers. I was alone. The silence of the basement room was thick, broken only by the hum of the ancient air conditioning unit rattling in the window. I needed a glass of water. More than that, I needed Connor. He had a way of grounding me, a steady hand on my shoulder that usually quieted the frantic buzzing in my skull. I hoisted the heavy skirts, the fabric rustling like dry leaves, and slipped out of the suite. The hallway was dim, the fluorescent lights buzzing with a sickly yellow glow. I turned the corner toward the groomsman's dressing room. I didn't hear words at first. I heard the wet, rhythmic slap of skin against skin. I stopped. My breath caught in my throat, a dry, ragged snag. The sound was coming from the janitor's closet, a heavy wooden door left cracked open by an inch. I didn't want to look. My brain, primitive and desperate, screamed at me to turn around, to go back to the smell of stale lilies, and pretend the hallway was empty. But my feet, encased in those agonizing satin heels, moved forward. I leaned closer to the crack. The air seeping out of the closet hit my face. It was warm. It smelled of bleach, damp mop strings, and Connor's signature cologne, a sharp, woody scent mixed with bergamot. Beneath it, cloying and cheap, was the undeniable artificial strawberry of Mia's body lotion. Maya, my maid of honor. "Connor," a voice whimpered. It was a high, thin sound. "Shh," Connor panted. His voice, the voice that had whispered vows to me in the dark, the voice that had promised forever over a plate of cold pasta 3 years ago. Almost. Just wait. I didn't gasp. I didn't burst through the door screaming. The movies lie to you about betrayal. There is no soaring orchestral music, no dramatic collapse to the floor. Instead, my stomach churned with violent, sudden nausea. Saliva flooded my mouth, hot and metallic. My vision narrowed to the scuffed linoleum floor, a dirty beige tile with a black scuff mark shaped like a crescent moon. I felt distinctly, profoundly stupid. I pressed my hand against the cold plaster wall to steady myself. The rough texture of the paint scraped against my palm. I could hear the rustle of clothing, the metallic clink of a belt buckle hitting the aluminum bucket inside the closet. "We have to go," Mia whispered, breathless, frantic. "She's going to be looking for you." "Let her wait," Connor muttered. I backed away. My heels were completely silent on the linoleum. I didn't run. I walked, methodically, putting one foot in front of the other, back to the bridal suite. I closed the door behind me and locked it with a sharp, heavy click. I walked over to the full-length mirror. Sadie, the bride. My lipstick was a perfect, muted rose. My hair was pinned in an intricate, unyielding twist. I looked exactly like the woman I was supposed to be, yet I felt entirely hollowed out, a gutted fish left on a dock. A single tear spilled over, hot and stinging, dragging a thick, black line of waterproof mascara down my cheek. I didn't wipe it away. I let it ruin the makeup. I let it stain the pristine surface of the facade. Someone knocked on the door. "Sadie? Honey, it's time." I stared at the mirror for 5 more seconds. The nausea ebbed, replaced by a cold, settling numbness. It was a heavy, dark thing, anchoring me to the floor. I grabbed a tissue, spat on it, and aggressively scrubbed the black streak from my cheek. It left a raw, red smear behind. "Coming," I said. My voice sounded flat. "Dead." I unlocked the door. It was time for a wedding. The organ music swelled, a suffocating, booming vibration that rattled the stained glass windows of the church. My father linked his arm through mine. He was sweating, his hand clammy through the thin fabric of his rented tuxedo. He smiled at me, a tight, nervous thing. "You look beautiful, kiddo," he whispered. I tasted bile at the back of my throat. "Thanks, Dad." The heavy oak doors opened. 200 faces turned toward me. 200 sets of eyes, judging, smiling, expecting a show. The air in the sanctuary was stifling, thick with the scent of burning wax, expensive perfumes, and the collective body heat of the crowd. I looked down the long aisle. The red carpet looked like a tongue rolling out to swallow me whole. At the end of it stood Connor. His tuxedo fit him perfectly. His sandy hair was swept back. He smiled when he saw me, a soft, practiced expression of awe. It was the same smile he used when he managed to close a difficult sale at the dealership. Next to him, a few feet away, stood Mia. Her blush-pink dress clung to her hips. Her lips were slightly swollen. She wouldn't meet my eyes. I walked. Every step sent a jolt of pain up my calves from the shoes, but I welcomed it. The physical pain kept me tethered. It kept me from floating away into the rafters. When I reached the altar, my father kissed my cheek and handed me over. Connor reached for my hands. His fingers were warm. They felt slightly damp. "You're shaking," he whispered, stepping close. The smell of bergamot and wood smoke hit me, mingling sickeningly with a faint, lingering trace of artificial strawberry. "You look perfect." I looked at him, really looked at him. I saw the slight asymmetry of his jaw, the tiny scar above his left eyebrow, the way his pupils were slightly dilated with adrenaline. He was a stranger, a pathetic, lying stranger. The priest began to speak. His voice droned on, a monotonous hum of scripture and duty. I didn't hear a word of it. I was hyperfixated on the microphone clipped to the priest's lapel. And so, if anyone can show just cause why they may not lawfully be joined together, let them speak now, or forever hold their peace. The priest paused. It was a ceremonial pause, a fraction of a second meant for dramatic effect, before moving on. Nobody ever speaks. I pulled my hands out of Connor's grip. My skin felt instantly cold where his warmth had been. "I have a cause," I said. My voice wasn't loud, but in the cavernous silence of the church, it cracked like a whip. The organist, who had been softly playing a background chord, slipped and hit a dissonant, jarring note. Connor blinked. His practiced smile faltered, melting into a mask of pure confusion. "Sadie, what are you doing?" I turned toward the congregation. The faces were no longer smiling. They were a sea of wide, shocked eyes. I looked at Mia. The color drained from her face so fast she looked like a corpse in a pink dress. "He's screwing the maid of honor," I said. I leaned slightly toward the priest's lapel mic. The speakers overhead popped with static, amplifying my words to a booming decree. In the janitor's closet, about 15 minutes ago. She smells like cheap strawberry lotion, if anyone wants to verify. A collective gasp sucked the oxygen from the room. Somewhere in the third row, Connor's mother let out a strangled, high-pitched noise. "Sadie, are you insane?" Connor hissed, grabbing my wrist. His grip was tight, bruising. The facade was entirely gone now, replaced by a panicked, ugly snarl. "Shut up!" "Let go of me," I said, my voice dead calm. "You're ruining everything." He spat, his face turning a mottled, furious red. Before I could rip my arm away, before the murmurs of the crowd could erupt into full chaos, a sound cut through the tension. It was the sound of the heavy oak doors at the back of the church slamming open. It wasn't a polite entrance. The wood hit the stone walls with a violent, echoing crack that made everyone, including Connor, flinch. The temperature in the room seemed to drop 10 degrees. I looked down the long, red aisle. 4 men walked in. They didn't look like wedding guests. They wore suits, yes, but not the rented, ill-fitting kind. These suits were dark, meticulously tailored, and moved with a heavy, fluid grace. The 3 men in the back walked with their hands near their waists, their eyes scanning the pews with terrifying clinical precision. But it was the man in the front who sucked all the air out of the room. He was tall, with shoulders that blocked out the light from the vestibule. His hair was dark, clipped short on the sides, and his jaw looked like it had been chiseled from granite. He moved without making a single sound. No scuffing shoes, no rustling fabric. He was a shadow moving over the red carpet. The silence in the church shifted. It was no longer the silence of shock. It was the suffocating silence of primal fear. Connor let go of my wrist as if my skin had caught fire. I looked at him. He was trembling, actually vibrating with terror. His eyes were wide, fixed on the approaching man, and I watched, fascinated, as a bead of sweat rolled down his temple and dropped onto his stiff white collar. "Oh God," Connor whimpered. "No, not now." The man reached the altar. He didn't look at the priest. He didn't look at the 200 terrified guests. He looked at Connor. His eyes were black. Not dark brown, but a flat, lightless black. When he spoke, his voice was a low, gravelly rumble that vibrated in the floorboards beneath my feet. "Hello, Connor," Gabriel Rossi said. "I believe you owe me something." The priest had backed away, pressing himself flat against the marble altar, as if hoping to blend into the stone. Gabriel Rossi didn't even acknowledge him. He stood in the center of the sanctuary, casually adjusting the cuffs of his immaculately tailored midnight blue suit. The faint metallic click of his platinum cufflinks sounded unnaturally loud. "Gabriel," Connor choked out. His voice cracked, high and pathetic. I have the money. I just need a few more days. The wedding, the gifts. I was going to pay you tomorrow." Gabriel tilted his head a fraction of an inch. A sharp, cynical smirk touched the corner of his mouth. It wasn't a smile. It was a blade. "Tomorrow," Gabriel repeated. The word rolled off his tongue, slow and mockingly thoughtful. "You stole $3 million from my shipping ledger, Connor. You filtered it through a shell company in the Caymans, bought yourself a very nice sports car, and I assume paid for this rather ostentatious circus." Gabriel gestured vaguely to the floral arrangements. "You don't have $3 million in envelopes on the gift table." A woman in the front row, my aunt, let out a soft, terrified sob. One of Gabriel's men in the back simply turned his head toward the sound, and the sobbing choked off instantly into a breathless silence. I stood there in my heavy, suffocating dress, watching the man I was supposed to marry crumble into a weeping, trembling mess. The numbness inside me deepened, solidifying into a strange, crystalline clarity. My life was a wreckage, a smoking crater. And yet, I couldn't look away from Gabriel. He smelled of rain on hot asphalt and something expensive, sharp and metallic. It was a dangerous scent. "Please!" Connor begged, dropping to his knees. The sharp crease of his tuxedo pants broke. He clasped his hands together. "Please, Mr. Rossi, I'll get it. I'll sell the car. I'll sell the house." "The house is mortgaged to the hilt," Gabriel said, sounding profoundly bored. "The car covers a fraction." "No, Connor. You are entirely bankrupt, morally and financially." Gabriel finally shifted his gaze. He looked at me. His dark eyes swept over me, a slow, clinical appraisal. He took in the ruined mascara on my cheek, the rigid posture of my shoulders, the tight grip of my fists at my sides. He didn't look at me with pity. He looked at me like a strategist evaluating a piece on a chessboard. "I heard your announcement," Gabriel said to me, his tone shifting. It was smoother now, quieter, meant only for the two of us despite the crowd. A bold move, exposing him at the altar. I respect a woman who prefers to burn the house down rather than live in the ashes. I swallowed the dry lump in my throat. I refused to shake. "He burned it down. I just handed out the matches." A genuine spark of amusement flared in Gabriel's dark eyes. "Pragmatic." He turned his attention back to the pathetic heap that was Connor. "Stand up, you miserable worm." Connor scrambled to his feet, swaying slightly. "I am going to take everything from you, Connor," Gabriel said, his voice dropping to a lethal whisper. "I am going to take the car. I am going to take the house. I am going to strip your accounts, ruin your credit, and ensure you spend the rest of your miserable life looking over your shoulder." Gabriel paused, letting the terror marinate. Then he looked back at me. "But I have an immediate problem," Gabriel continued, his eyes locked on mine. "My grandfather is a traditional man. He holds the keys to a vast network of family trusts. He refuses to hand over full control of the eastern ports until I am settled, married, a family man." Gabriel let out a short, humorless breath. "I have no time for courtships, and I despise the women who circle my world looking for a payday." I stared at him, the gears in my exhausted brain slowly grinding together. "What are you saying?" "I need a wife. Immediately," Gabriel said. He stepped closer. The heat radiating off him was intense, grounding. "You need to salvage this absolute disaster of a day, and frankly, you look like a woman who could use a little vengeance." "You want to marry me?" I stated. It wasn't a question. It was absurd. It was insanity. Connor let out a strangled gasp. "You can't—" "Silence!" Gabriel snapped, not even looking at him. Connor clamped his mouth shut, his teeth audibly clicking together. Gabriel focused entirely on me. "A business transaction. 1 year, you play the part of the devoted wife at family functions. In exchange, I pay off whatever debts this fool left you with. I ensure you are financially independent for the rest of your life, and I provide you with the distinct pleasure of watching me ruin the man who humiliated you." My heart hammered against my ribs, a frantic, bruised bird trapped in a cage. I looked at Connor. He was staring at me with wide, pleading eyes, silently begging me to say no, to save him, to act like the good, compliant girl he thought he had manipulated. I looked at Mia, still frozen near the altar, trembling in her pink dress. Then I looked at Gabriel. There was no warmth in his offer. There was no romance. It was cold, hard, and entirely transactional. He was a monster in a tailored suit, but I was done being the victim. If I was going to be dragged into hell today, I might as well hold the devil's hand. 1 year, I said, my voice shockingly steady. Gabriel's lips curved into a dangerous, breathtaking smile. 1 year. He held out his hand. It was large, the knuckles slightly bruised, a heavy silver ring gleaming on his index finger. I didn't hesitate. I reached out and placed my hand in his. His grip was firm, warm, and entirely unyielding. Gabriel looked over my shoulder at the terrified priest. "Father," he said, the command echoing off the stone walls. "Skip the homily. Let's get to the vows." Father Thomas looked as though he might swallow his own tongue. He was a small, fragile man, and his knuckles were completely white where he gripped the edges of his leather-bound Bible. He looked at Gabriel, then at me, and finally at Connor, who was still on his knees, weeping silently into his hands. "The vows," Gabriel prompted. His voice was not loud, but it carried a terrifying edge of impatience. Yes. Yes, of course," the priest stammered. He didn't bother opening the book. He swallowed hard, his Adam's apple bobbing in his thin throat. "Do you, Gabriel? Rossi, take this woman!" "Sadie," I supplied. My own voice sounded disconnected, like I was listening to it through a thick wall of water. "Take Sadie to be your lawfully wedded wife?" "I do," Gabriel said. He didn't look at the priest. He was watching me, his dark eyes cataloguing every micro-expression on my face. "And do you, Sadie, take Gabriel?" The priest faltered. "I do," I interrupted. "The rings," Father Thomas squeaked. Gabriel finally looked away from me. He looked down at Connor. "The ring, Connor." Connor looked up, his face blotchy, his nose running. He reached into his tuxedo pocket with trembling fingers and pulled out the small velvet box. He fumbled with the hinge, dropping it once onto the stone floor before picking it up and holding it out. Gabriel didn't take the box. He waited. Understanding dawned on Connor with painful slowness. Shaking, he pulled the ring free. It was white gold, a thin band studded with tiny, cloudy diamonds. Connor held it up. Gabriel plucked it from his sweaty palm, holding the metal between his thumb and forefinger like a dead insect. He turned back to me and took my left hand. His skin was dry and warm. He slid the ring onto my finger. It fit perfectly, a cruel reminder of the life I was supposed to be starting 10 minutes ago. "By the power vested in me," the priest rushed, practically tripping over the syllables, "I pronounce you husband and wife. You may kiss." Gabriel stepped closer. The scent of rain and hot asphalt intensified, completely wiping out the lingering smell of Mia's strawberry lotion. I braced myself, my muscles locking up, expecting a brutal, claiming kiss meant for the audience. Instead, Gabriel leaned in and brushed his lips lightly against my cheekbone. It was barely a touch, a phantom pressure that lasted a fraction of a second. "Breathe, Sadie," he murmured against my ear. His breath was warm. "You look like you're going to pass out, and I don't carry brides." He pulled back. The sharp angles of his face gave nothing away. He turned to the congregation. They were perfectly still, a wax museum of horrified relatives and terrified friends. "Thank you all for coming," Gabriel announced, his voice echoing in the rafters. "The reception is cancelled." He placed a heavy hand against the small of my back, right where the boning of my corset dug the deepest. He didn't wait for me to process the command. He simply propelled me forward. We walked back down the red carpet. The silence was absolute. Nobody whispered. Nobody moved. I kept my eyes locked on the heavy oak doors at the end of the aisle. I didn't look at my mother, who was clutching her chest in the third row. I didn't look at Mia. I just put one agonizing satin heel in front of the other. When we breached the doors and stepped out onto the concrete steps of the church, the afternoon sun hit me like a physical blow. It was a beautiful, cloudless May afternoon. Traffic hummed on the street below. A woman walked a golden retriever on the opposite sidewalk. The world had kept spinning while my entire reality collapsed. A black SUV, sleek and heavily armored, idled at the curb. One of Gabriel's men, a giant with a thick neck and a badly broken nose, pulled the rear door open. Gabriel guided me inside. I gathered the massive, ridiculous skirts of my dress and folded myself into the leather seat. Gabriel slid in next to me, bringing the door shut with a solid, heavy thud that instantly muted the sounds of the street. The interior smelled of rich, conditioned leather and peppermint. The tinted windows turned the bright afternoon into a permanent, muted dusk. Gabriel leaned forward and tapped the glass partition, separating us from the driver. Home. The car pulled away from the curb. I looked out the window, watching the stone steps of St. Jude's roll past. Connor had stumbled out of the doors, his hands gripping his hair, looking frantically around the empty street. I turned away from the window. The adrenaline was beginning to drain out of my bloodstream, leaving behind a cold, hollow ache in my joints. The corset was crushing my lungs. "You can take the pins out," Gabriel said. I looked at him. He had already opened a slim tablet and was scrolling through lines of text, his expression entirely detached. He wasn't looking at me. My hands went to my head, my fingers clumsy and stiff. I started pulling the heavy metal bobby pins from the intricate twist at the nape of my neck, dropping them one by one into the cup holder between our seats. They hit the plastic with sharp, tiny clicks. "What happens now?" I asked. My voice sounded raw, like I had been screaming for hours. Gabriel didn't look up from his screen. "Now, you become Sadie Rossi, and we get to work." The drive lasted 45 minutes. We left the city limits, trading congested highways for winding, tree-lined roads that crept higher into the hills. The car turned off the main road onto a private drive, stopping before a pair of massive wrought-iron gates. They swung open silently, revealing a property that looked less like a home and more like a high-tech compound. The house was a sprawling structure of glass, steel, and dark stone, cut sharply into the side of a ridge. There were no manicured flower beds or charming fountains. The landscaping was brutally minimalist, sharp angles of concrete, low-lying shrubs, and strategically placed lighting that eliminated any shadows. I counted 4 cameras just on the driveway approach. The SUV stopped in front of the massive glass doors. Gabriel pocketed his tablet and stepped out, adjusting his suit jacket. He didn't open my door. The man with the broken nose did that. I stepped out onto the crushed gravel. It crunched loudly under my heels. The air up here was cooler, biting through the thin lace of my sleeves. Gabriel walked through the front doors without looking back to see if I was following. I hoisted my skirts and hurried after him, feeling entirely ridiculous. The inside of the house was a cavernous expanse of polished grey slate and floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking a dark, dense forest. It felt sterile, a place designed to be scrubbed clean of evidence. A woman was waiting in the foyer. She was in her late 50s, wearing a simple grey dress, her silver hair pulled back into a severe bun. Her posture was ramrod straight. "Welcome back, Mr. Rossi," she said. Her voice was flat, betraying absolutely zero surprise at the fact that he had left the house 2 hours ago single and returned with a woman in a wedding dress. "Martha, this is Sadie," Gabriel said, tossing his keys onto a marble console table. "She will be staying in the primary suite. Have someone bring her things from her apartment by tomorrow morning." "Very well," Martha said, her eyes finally flicking to me. She gave me a curt, measuring nod. "Mom." "Gabriel," I said, the name feeling strange and metallic on my tongue. "My apartment is—" "Connor's name is on the lease. He has the keys." Gabriel stopped at the base of a floating glass staircase. He looked back at me, a flicker of genuine irritation crossing his face. "I am aware of where you lived. By the time my men get there, Connor will not be a problem. Martha will show you up. I have calls to make." He turned and disappeared down a long hallway, leaving me standing in a puddle of white silk in the middle of his fortress. Martha gestured to the stairs. "If you'll follow me, ma'am." I followed her. My calves were burning. The primary suite was at the end of the second-floor corridor. It was massive, dominated by a king-sized bed with dark, charcoal linens and a wall of windows offering the same unbroken view of the pines. There were no personal touches, no photographs, no books, no knickknacks. It looked like a luxury hotel room meant for an assassin. "The master bath is through there," Martha said, pointing to a frosted glass door. "I will bring you some water." She left, pulling the heavy door shut behind her. I was alone. The silence in the room was absolute, insulated by thick, soundproof glass. I walked over to the bed and sat down. The mattress barely yielded beneath my weight. I looked down at my hands. The cheap diamond ring Connor had bought me, the one Gabriel had forced onto my finger, was catching the recessed lighting, throwing off pathetic little glints of light. The dam broke. It wasn't a graceful, cinematic cry. It was an ugly, violent heave that ripped out of my chest, doubling me over. I gasped for air, my hands clutching the stiff tool of my dress. 3 years. 3 years of compromise, of listening to Connor's complaints about his boss, of cooking his favorite meals, of planning a life down to the color of our imaginary kitchen cabinets. All of it a lie, unraveling in a closet that smelled like bleach and Mia's sweat. I cried until my ribs physically ached, until the mascara I hadn't managed to scrub off was burning my eyes. When the tears finally stopped, they left behind a bone-deep exhaustion. I needed this dress off. I stood up and reached behind my back, my fingers digging for the tiny metal zipper hidden beneath a row of decorative pearl buttons. I couldn't reach it. The fabric was too stiff, and my arms were shaking too badly. I tugged, I twisted, I pulled until the rough lace burned my shoulders, but the zipper wouldn't budge. The bedroom door opened. Gabriel walked in, holding a glass of water. He stopped a few feet inside the room, taking in my ruined makeup, the red marks on my shoulders, and the frantic, pathetic way I was clawing at my own spine. "I can't get it off," I choked out. The humiliation was sudden and absolute. I sounded like a child. Gabriel set the water on the nightstand. He walked over to me. His heavy footsteps made no sound on the thick rug. "Turn around." I turned, presenting my back to him. I felt his fingers brush the nape of my neck, moving aside the loose, tangled strands of my hair. His touch was clinical. There was no lingering heat, no cinematic tension. He gripped the top of the zipper. "Hold your breath," he said. I sucked in a breath. He pulled the zipper down in one smooth, forceful motion. The metal teeth parted with a sharp, tearing sound. Instantly, the pressure on my ribs vanished. The corset released, and I let out a long, ragged exhale, my shoulders slumping. "Thank you," I whispered. Gabriel stepped back. "There are fresh towels in the bathroom. One of my shirts is on the counter if you need something to sleep in. We have breakfast at 7. Don't be late." I turned to look at him, holding the bodice of the dress against my chest so it wouldn't fall. He was already looking at his phone, his expression completely closed off. "Gabriel," I said. He paused, glancing up. "Why me?" I asked. The question had been rattling around in my skull since the altar. You could have paid any woman to do this. You could have hired an actress. Why step into that mess? Gabriel looked at me for a long moment. His eyes were unreadable, dark voids that seemed to absorb the light in the room. "Because an actress would have hesitated," he said softly. "When I walked into that church, I offered you a lit match, and you didn't even blink before you threw it. I don't need a professional, Sadie. I need someone who knows how to burn things down." He turned and walked out of the room, shutting the door quietly behind him. I woke up to the smell of black coffee and the muffled sound of a helicopter rotor fading into the distance. For 10 seconds, I stared at the ceiling, trying to remember where I was. The sheets against my skin were cool, dense, and smelled faintly of expensive laundry detergent. Then, the memories of yesterday hit me like a physical assault. The closet, the church, the contract, the tears. I sat up. I was wearing Gabriel's dress shirt. It was stark white, incredibly soft, and swallowed me whole, the hem stopping mid-thigh. My wedding dress was gone. Someone had come into the room while I was dead to the world and removed the $10,000 mistake. I swung my legs over the side of the bed. My feet hit the hardwood floor, and a sharp spike of pain shot up my left calf, a lingering souvenir from the satin heels. I walked into the bathroom, splashed cold water on my face, and stared in the mirror. I looked terrible. My eyes were puffy and bloodshot, my skin pale and drawn. I looked exactly like a woman who had blown up her entire life on a whim. I found a pair of black leggings and an oversized grey cashmere sweater folded neatly on a chair in the corner of the bedroom. Martha's doing, no doubt. I put them on, the soft fabric a massive comfort after yesterday's armor, and headed downstairs. It was 6:55. The house was completely silent, but it felt awake. The ambient tension was thick. I found the kitchen by following the smell of bacon. It was a massive, industrial-grade space, entirely stainless steel and dark marble. Gabriel was sitting at the end of a long island counter. He was wearing a dark grey suit, minus the jacket, his tie pulled perfectly tight against his throat. He was typing on a laptop, a cup of black coffee steaming at his elbow. He didn't look up when I walked in. "There is coffee in the carafe, eggs on the stove." I walked over to the counter, poured myself a mug of coffee. It was strong enough to peel paint, and sat down on a stool 3 feet away from him. The counter was cold. "Sleep well?" he asked, still looking at his screen. "Like the dead," I said, wrapping my hands around the hot mug. Gabriel hit a final key, closed the laptop with a snap, and finally looked at me. In the harsh morning light pouring through the floor-to-ceiling windows, he looked even more intimidating. There were faint, dark circles under his eyes. He slid a thick manila folder across the marble island toward me. "Your new life," Gabriel said. I opened the folder. Inside were copies of a marriage certificate, a new driver's license with the name Sadie Rossi, and a thick stack of legal documents detailing the transfer of $3 million into a trust account in my name. The sheer volume of the money made my stomach pitch. Beneath that was a dossier, 3 pages of typed notes. "What is this?" I asked, tapping the dossier. "The rules of engagement," Gabriel said, taking a sip of his coffee. "My grandfather, Arthur Rossi, is arriving in the city tonight. We are having dinner with him at his estate in Long Island tomorrow evening. You need to memorize those notes before then." I pulled the pages out. They contained details about Arthur Rossi, the hierarchy of the family business, and bizarrely, details about my relationship with Gabriel. "According to this," I said, scanning the first page, We met in a coffee shop 6 months ago. I spilled an iced latte on your shoes." "It's a believable meet-cute," Gabriel said dryly. "Arthur is a cynic, but he has a weak spot for traditional romance. You will tell him you were intimidated by me at first, but my persistence won you over. You will tell him we kept it secret because you were breaking off a previous engagement, a messy one. So we're just leaning into the corner of it all." "We are weaponizing the truth," Gabriel corrected. "The rumor of what happened at St. Jude's yesterday is already circulating through the families. It makes you look impulsive, passionate, and fiercely protective of your pride. Arthur respects all 3 of those traits." I set the papers down. I looked at Gabriel, forcing myself to hold his gaze. "And what happens if he doesn't buy it? What happens if he looks at me and sees exactly what this is? A business transaction to secure your inheritance?" Gabriel's expression hardened. The slight, businesslike ease vanished, replaced by a cold, predatory stillness. "If he doesn't buy it," Gabriel said, his voice dropping into a register that made the hair on my arms stand up, "my uncle Marco will use the doubt to challenge my succession. If Marco challenges me, the eastern ports will lock down. If the ports lock down, we lose millions a week, and my associates will look for someone to blame." He leaned forward, placing his hands flat on the marble. "I do not lose, Sadie, and I do not tolerate liabilities. You will convince him that you love me. You will convince him that you belong in this family. Do you understand?" The reality of what I had done settled over me, heavy and suffocating. I hadn't just married a rich man to spite my cheating ex. I had walked straight into a war zone wearing a blindfold. "I understand," I said, my voice steady despite the hammering in my chest. "But if I'm doing this, if I am putting myself on the front lines of your family drama, I have a rule of my own." Gabriel's eyes narrowed slightly. It wasn't anger. It was curiosity. "Go on. Don't lie to me," I said, tapping the folder. "I will memorize your script. I will smile at your grandfather. And I will play the devoted wife. But behind closed doors, you tell me the truth about the danger I am in. No shadows, Gabriel. If someone is coming for you, I want to know exactly where to stand, so I don't get shot." For a long, agonizing moment, the kitchen was entirely silent. Gabriel stared at me, analyzing the demand, searching my face for weakness. Slowly, the corner of his mouth twitched upward. It was a terrifying, genuine expression of approval. "Deal," Gabriel said. He stood up, grabbing his laptop. "Memorize the dossier. We have a fitting for you at noon. You need a dress for tomorrow night. Something that says you belong to me." He walked out of the kitchen, his heavy footsteps fading down the hall. I sat alone in the massive, cold room, staring at the fake timeline of our love story, wondering if I would survive the year. Pins scraped against my ribs. The seamstress, a small, severe woman named Beatrice, was practically vibrating with nervous energy as she adjusted the hem of the dress. She smelled of starch and peppermint mints. "Don't breathe too deeply, Mrs. Rossi," Beatrice mumbled around a mouthful of silver pins. I hated the title. It felt heavy, like a lead apron they put on you at the dentist's office. The dress was oxblood silk. It didn't drape. It clung. It possessed long sleeves and a high neckline, but the back plunged entirely to the base of my spine. It was a garment designed for exactly one purpose: to make it impossible for anyone in the room to look away. It felt entirely foreign against my skin, cold and unforgiving, unlike the cozy cashmere I had discarded on the chair. Gabriel stood by the window of the fitting room, staring out at the compound's motor court. He wore a fresh suit, charcoal this time, over a black shirt with no tie. He hadn't looked at me since I walked out from behind the screen. "Is the back strictly necessary?" I asked, shifting my weight. My calves still ached. "It feels a bit exposed." Gabriel turned. His gaze tracked from the hem of the dress, up my spine, to the tight bun Martha had wrestled my hair into. The temperature in the room seemed to drop. "My Uncle Marco will be looking for a weak link tonight," Gabriel said, his voice flat. "He expects me to have married a terrified, impulsive civilian. He expects you to hide. The dress tells him you have absolutely nothing to be ashamed of." He walked toward me. Beatrice hurriedly backed away, dropping a pin on the hardwood floor with a tiny tink. Gabriel stopped inches from my back. I could feel the heat radiating off him, a sharp contrast to the cold silk. His hand hovered over my bare skin before his knuckles lightly grazed the base of my spine. I flinched, my breath hitched in my throat, a purely involuntary response. "You are shaking," he murmured, his voice low, meant only for me. "I'm terrified," I admitted, staring straight ahead into the full-length mirror. In the glass, he looked like a shadow looming over my shoulder. "I'm a marketing manager from Queens. I don't know how to negotiate with mob bosses." "You don't negotiate," Gabriel said. He moved closer. The scent of rain and hot asphalt washed over me again, grounding my frantic pulse. "You sit beside me. You smile when my grandfather speaks. You ignore Marco. And if anyone asks you about yesterday, you look them dead in the eye and tell them you upgraded." He stepped back, the loss of his body heat leaving me strangely cold. "We leave in 10 minutes, he told Beatrice. "Finish it." The drive to Long Island was suffocatingly quiet. The partition in the SUV was up, isolating Gabriel and me in the dim rear cabin. Rain had started to fall, smearing the streetlights into streaks of yellow and red against the tinted glass. I spent the journey running my thumb over the cloudy diamonds of the ring on my left hand. Connor's ring. It was a glaring, cheap eyesore against the expensive oxblood silk. Gabriel hadn't replaced it. He insisted it added to the authenticity of the hasty, passionate narrative. To me, it just felt like a physical manifestation of my own stupidity. "Stop rubbing the ring," Gabriel said suddenly. He was reading reports on his tablet, his face bathed in a harsh blue glow. "You look like you're trying to summon a genie." "I'm trying to figure out how I didn't see it," I muttered, dropping my hands to my lap. 3 years. We shared a bank account. We debated adopting a dog. How did I not know he was sleeping with my best friend? Gabriel didn't look up from his screen. "People see what they want to see, Sadie. It's a survival mechanism. You wanted stability, so your brain ignored the cracks in the foundation." "That's very clinical," I snapped. My stomach was churning with a mixture of car sickness and dread. "It's practical," he replied, finally clicking the tablet off and sliding it into the leather seatback pocket. "In my world, ignoring cracks gets you killed. In yours, it gets you humiliated in a church basement. The mechanics are the same." I turned my head to glare at him, but the sharp retort died in my throat. We were pulling up to a set of gates that made Gabriel's compound look like a starter home. The stone pillars were topped with carved lions, their faces worn smooth by decades of rain. The gates swung open, and the tires crunched onto a long, winding driveway lined with ancient oak trees. The estate was a massive Tudor-style mansion. It looked old, real money, blood money. The SUV stopped. The heavy door was pulled open by a man in a black raincoat. The cold air rushed in, smelling of wet earth, dying leaves, and the distant, salty tang of the ocean. Gabriel stepped out first. He didn't offer me a hand, but he waited, his broad shoulders shielding me from the worst of the wind as I climbed out. "Shoulders back," he instructed quietly. "Do not look down." I forced my spine straight. The cold silk of the dress pressed against my bare back. I stepped up to his side, and without a word, he offered me his arm. I looped my hand through it. His bicep was hard as granite beneath the wool of his suit. "Ready?" he asked. "No," I said. "Good," Gabriel said, a dark smirk touching his lips. "Fear keeps you sharp. Let's go meet the family." The inside of the house smelled like roasted garlic, old wood smoke, and an undercurrent of something sharp and chemical. Cigar smoke baked into the expensive Persian rugs. The foyer was dimly lit by a massive, dripping crystal chandelier that looked entirely out of place against the dark oak paneling. A butler, an actual butler in a vest, took Gabriel's coat but didn't dare look me in the eye. Gabriel led me down a long hallway, our footsteps muffled by the thick runners. The murmur of voices grew louder. I squeezed his arm. He didn't react, but he subtly adjusted his stance, pressing my hand firmer against his side. We entered the dining room. It was a cavernous space. A mahogany table stretched down the center, set for 12, though only 3 people were in the room. At the head of the table sat Arthur Rossi. He was smaller than I expected, frail and hunched in a high-backed leather chair. He had Gabriel's black eyes, but where Gabriel's were sharp and calculating, Arthur's were clouded with age and suspicion. An oxygen tank sat quietly humming near his right foot. To his left sat a man in his late 50s, Marco. He wore a double-breasted suit that was a bit too tight, his hair slicked back heavily with product. He smelled strongly of bergamot and expensive musk. He was swirling a glass of amber liquid, his eyes locked on me the moment I crossed the threshold. "Gabriel," Arthur said. His voice was a raspy, wet wheeze, but it commanded the room instantly. "You're late." "Traffic on the bridge, nonno," Gabriel replied smoothly, not dropping my arm. He guided me toward the table. "I'd like you to meet my wife, Sadie." Silence fell over the room, like a heavy, suffocating blanket. Arthur leaned forward, resting his chin on a silver-tipped cane. His milky eyes dragged over me, stripping away the oxblood silk, the makeup, the facade. I felt violently exposed. I remembered Gabriel's instruction, "Do not look down." I kept my chin leveled, forcing myself to hold the old man's stare. "Sadie," Arthur rasped. He tasted the name. "Not an Italian girl." "No, sir," I said. My voice was remarkably steady, though my stomach was doing violent, sickening flips. "Irish, mostly, with a bit of everything else." Marco let out a short, ugly laugh. It sounded like a bark. "Everything else? I suppose that's one way to describe what happened at St. Jude's yesterday. A real melting pot of drama." Marco set his glass down. The clink was loud in the quiet room. "I heard you made quite the spectacle, sweetheart. Dumped the car salesman at the altar and jumped into my nephew's car before the ink on the marriage license was even dry. You work fast." Heat flooded my cheeks. It wasn't embarrassment. It was pure, unadulterated fury. Connor had made me a victim. I refused to let this slick, cologne-soaked mobster turn me into a punchline. I unlinked my arm from Gabriel's and stepped up to the table. I placed both hands flat on the polished mahogany and leaned slightly toward Marco. My fiancé was having sex with my maid of honor in a janitor's closet while my father was waiting to walk me down the aisle, I said, my voice dropping into a dangerously calm register. I didn't make a spectacle, Marco. I eliminated a liability. I prefer men who don't hide their filth behind closed doors. Marco's smirk vanished. His jaw tightened, the skin around his eyes pulling taut. I turned my attention back to Arthur. The old man was perfectly still. "Gabriel doesn't lie to me," I said, holding Arthur's gaze. "He told me exactly what this family is. He told me the risks. I didn't marry him for his money, and I didn't marry him because I was desperate. I married him because he is the only man I've ever met who looks a threat in the eye and destroys it. I wanted to be on the winning side." The silence stretched. It pulled tight, a rubber band ready to snap and take my eye out. I could feel Gabriel standing behind me, perfectly still, a coiled spring. Then Arthur began to cough. It started low in his chest, a wet, rattling sound that slowly morphed into a dry, breathless chuckle. He tapped his cane against the floor. "She has teeth," Arthur wheezed, his clouded eyes crinkling at the corners. He looked past me to Gabriel. "I like her, Gabe. She's too skinny, and she looks like she needs a stiff drink. But I like her. Sit down. Both of you." I pulled my hands off the table. My palms left two foggy, sweaty prints on the mahogany. I wiped my hands on the invisible seams of my dress and took the chair Gabriel pulled out for me. Dinner was agonizing. The food, heavy plates of veal parmesan, rich risotto, and bitter greens, tasted like ash in my mouth. I focused on the mechanics of eating. Cut, lift, chew, swallow. I drank 3 glasses of the heavy red wine they poured, letting the alcohol blunt the razor-sharp edges of my anxiety. Marco didn't speak to me again. He directed a barrage of passive-aggressive questions at Gabriel regarding a shipment detained in Newark. Gabriel answered them all with a chilling, detached calm, dissecting Marco's arguments with surgical precision while never raising his voice. I watched them. I watched the way Gabriel held his knife, the tight control in his shoulders, the way he commanded the space simply by existing in it. He wasn't just a businessman. He was a predator, patiently enduring the buzzing of a fly. "And the car salesman?" Arthur asked suddenly, pushing his half-eaten plate away. The question was directed at Gabriel, but the old man's eyes flicked to me. "I don't like loose ends. Does he have family? Connections?" "Connor is a civilian, nonno," Gabriel said, taking a sip of his wine. "He owes me a substantial amount of money. Or rather, he did." "Did?" Marco echoed, raising an eyebrow. "He defaulted," Gabriel stated calmly. "His debt has been restructured." A cold spike of adrenaline pierced through the wine haze in my brain. Restructured. "Good," Arthur grunted, wiping his mouth with a linen napkin. "A man who cannot respect his own bride cannot be trusted to respect his debts. Make an example of him. Show the girl you can protect what is yours." Gabriel didn't look at me. He just nodded once. "It is already in motion." Rain hammered the roof of the armored SUV, a heavy, rhythmic drumming that felt entirely separate from the sterile quiet of the leather-bound cabin. The tires hissed aggressively over flooded asphalt. I slumped against the door, digging my heel into the edge of my opposite foot until the agonizing black pump popped off. I did the same to the other. My toes were numb. The arches of my feet throbbed with a dull, hot ache. Every breath I took fought against the rigid boning of the oxblood silk corset, the fabric acting like a second, unforgiving rib cage. I tasted the heavy metallic tannins of the red wine at the back of my throat, masking the lingering bitterness of the greens from Arthur's table. "You did well." Gabriel's voice broke the silence, steady and flat. I turned my head. The harsh blue glare of his tablet screen washed over the sharp angles of his jaw, highlighting the faint shadow of stubble that hadn't been there at noon. He wasn't looking at me. His fingers swiped across the glass, dismissing whatever multi-million-dollar problem was on his desk. I lied through my teeth, I said, staring at the blurred, bleeding red taillights of a semi-truck ahead of us. I used my own humiliation like a poker chip to buy your grandfather's approval. It was disgusting. You survived, Gabriel countered. He tapped a final command on the screen and hit the lock button. The blue light vanished, plunging the cabin back into dim, amber street lamp shadows. In this family, survival is the only metric that matters. Morality is a luxury for people who don't have a target on their backs. I let my head loll against the cold glass of the window. The condensation seeped through the thin silk at my shoulder. The wine was making me bold, stripping away the heavy filter of self-preservation that had kept me tightly wound for the last 8 hours. My brain was a sluggish, exhausted mess, but one question kept gnawing at the edges of my consciousness. What did you do to him? Gabriel didn't ask who I meant. He didn't feign ignorance. He reached up, loosening his tie by a fraction of an inch. Connor's primary and secondary bank accounts were frozen at noon today, Gabriel said, his tone as casual as if he were reading a grocery list. The dealership he worked for happens to be a subsidiary of a holding company I control. He was terminated at 2 p.m. Gross negligence, documented and filed. He won't get severance. I sat up straight. The movement sent a sharp cramp up my right side, but I ignored it. You took his job? I took his foundation, Gabriel corrected, turning to look at me. His black eyes caught the passing headlights, briefly flashing like obsidian. His landlord, an associate of mine, served him with an immediate 30-day eviction notice this evening. The sports car he bought with my money has already been repossessed. It's currently sitting in a salvage yard in Queens, waiting to be crushed. My breath caught in my throat, a ragged little snag. By Monday morning, Gabriel continued, his voice dropping into a colder, quieter register. His credit score will be a smoking crater. He owes me $3 million, Sadie. He will spend the rest of his pathetic life working minimum wage, cash-in-hand jobs just to cover the vig. He will never own property. He will never secure a loan. He is entirely, irrevocably erased from polite society. I stared at him. It was one thing to crave revenge when you were standing in a church basement, crying over ruined waterproof mascara and a broken future. It was another thing entirely to hear the sterile, methodical, bureaucratic destruction of a human being's entire existence. There was no screaming, no physical violence. Gabriel had simply pressed a few buttons on a tablet and wiped Connor off the map. Do you pity him? Gabriel asked. It wasn't a taunt. It was a genuine, measuring question. He was watching my face, cataloguing the micro-expressions, waiting to see if the civilian in me would break. I looked down at my hands in my lap. I thought about the janitor's closet. I remembered the wet, rhythmic sound of skin slapping skin, the cloying, cheap smell of Mia's strawberry lotion cutting through the bleach. I remembered the way Connor had looked at me at the altar, not with guilt, not with sorrow, but with absolute fury, blaming me for exposing his lie to his mother. He hadn't been sorry. He had just been caught. I leaned back against the plush leather seat. No, I whispered. The truth of the syllable surprised me. It tasted metallic and cold on my tongue, but it was solid. I don't pity him at all. Gabriel studied me for a long, silent moment. Slowly he shifted his weight and reached across the wide expanse of the center console. I tensed, my muscles locking, expecting him to hand me a document, to point to a screen, to give me another command. Instead, his large, warm hand closed over mine. His grip was firm, engulfing my fingers and entirely hiding the cheap, cloudy diamond ring that still dug into my left hand. The contrast of his rough knuckles against the smooth, freezing silk of my dress was jarring. "Good," Gabriel murmured. The gravel in his voice was softer now, brushing against the quiet hum of the engine. Because sympathy is a liability you can no longer afford. He didn't pull his hand away. We sat in silence as the heavy armored vehicle tore through the dark, rain-slicked streets, leaving the old world far behind. I looked down at our joined hands. The blood-red fabric, the dark wool suit, the quiet, violent power radiating from the man beside me. I had traded a pathetic, lying boy for a literal monster. I had signed a contract for 1 year of pretending, of navigating a labyrinth of blood money, grudges, and hidden knives. But as Gabriel's thumb began to trace a slow, absent-minded, terrifyingly gentle circle against the back of my hand, a cold realization settled deep in the pit of my stomach. I wasn't afraid of the monster. I was afraid of how easily, how eagerly, my lungs were learning to breathe in the dark. Did Sadie make the ultimate power move? Or did she just lock herself in a gilded cage? Let us know in the comments if you would have signed Gabriel's contract or walked away. If you loved this dark, twisted dive into betrayal and Mafia vengeance, smash that like button, share this with your fellow romance addicts, and absolutely make sure you subscribe. Turn on notifications so you never miss another intense story. What do you think happens when the 1-year contract is up? Tell us below.